C.S. Lewis. A scholar of literature by profession and known best as a theologian and Christian apologist, Lewis is intriguingly effective as a philosopher as well. His book, The Abolition of Man, is a fascinating work on ethics focused on the Tao, a Chinese belief of the objectivity of moral values. In Chapter 3 of Lewis's book, also entitled The Abolition of Man, Lewis explores how the moral skepticism that plagues modern society as a result of rejecting objective moral values, paired with the ever-developing progress of science and technology, could possibly lead to the abolition of man. Many of the claims Lewis makes in his third chapter of The Abolition of Man are given sophisticated and creative expression in science fiction films like Jurassic Park, and conversely, the themes of such movies, like Bioethics, are given coherent organization in The Abolition of Man. Mark Eckel, in his article, Monster in the Mirror, The Problem with Technology is the Problem with Us, explains how science fiction can creatively depict this frightening result of a modern dependence on technology if there is a continued neglect of virtue and the moral objectivism of the Tao. He says science fiction exists because we know there is something more. Ancient to modern renditions of futuristic hopes and fears depend on assumptions about humanness, knowledge, and reality which are impacted by our created technology. Our desire to circumvent time-space boundaries leads us to build machines so we can cross dimensions. Our devotion to knowledge ignores ethical limits so we can explore seemingly limitless curiosities. Our dedication to progress resents any purpose other than addiction to betterment. Our definitions stand as totems to which we give obeisance. Our interest is information over truth. While Eckel refers to The Island of Dr. Moreau, there are several other films in which this denial of ethical limits in search of limitless curiosities can be seen. One such film is the aforementioned Jurassic Park. In the movie, innovator John Hammond and his team of scientists have found a way to replicate discovered dinosaur DNA and attempt to capitalize on their reappearance through the creation of a theme park centered around the creatures. While the film ultimately emphasizes the lack of control that Hammond truly has over the new creations, the ethical implications of such bioengineering are explored far before the chaos fully breaks loose. The voice of C.S. Lewis's philosophy in the film comes mostly through Dr. Ian Malcolm, a chaos theory mathematician who criticizes Hammond and his people for their irreverence for nature and nature-centered ethics.
What, we'll have a coupon day or something?
Yes. Gee, the lack of humility before nature that's being displayed here staggers me.
Well, thank you, Dr. Malcolm, but I think things are a little bit different than you and I had feared.
Yeah, I know. They're a lot worse. Yeah, don't you see the danger, John, inherent in what you're doing here? Genetic power is the most awesome force the planet's ever seen, but you wield it like a kid that's found his dad's gun.
I don't think you're giving us our due credit. Our scientists have done things which nobody's ever done before.
Yeah, but your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could that they didn't stop to think if they should.
The philosophical position of the film is even more evident when Michael Crichton's book Jurassic Park is taken into consideration as well. In Crichton's book, Malcolm is even more outspoken on how he believes the problem with this new science is that scientists can't just watch, they can't just appreciate, they can't just fit into the natural order. They have to make something unnatural happen. That is the scientist's job. And now we have whole societies that try to be scientific. Malcolm's implication that the scientist's real job is to merely observe nature and not attempt to control nature is reminiscent of C.S. Lewis's comparison of modern science to magic in The Abolition of Man. To conform nature to humanity rather than humanity to nature, scientists become more like magicians who give themselves up to gain a sort of control in life and sovereignty over nature. In The Abolition of Man, Lewis argues that the conditioners, the name he gives to the people who wish to gain control over nature, must come to be motivated simply by their own pleasure. Rather than the previous ethical measurement of actions determined by natural law, the conditioners can only make decisions based on an arbitrary desire, because by changing nature or humanity, the objective law that is derived from that nature will also be changed, resulting in a destruction of objective moral values that will lead to the end of humanity. The future that Lewis saw was one where mankind would be cut out into some fresh shape at the will of some few lucky people in one lucky generation which has learned how to do it. Lewis feared that science, when applied to humanity, would lead to fatal consequences, which strikes a chord with Jurassic Park. But what if the types of engineering of dinosaur DNA present in the film were applied to humans? The horrifying results of such an attempt by conditioners to create something new from human beings have been explored in many films, but Vincenzo Natali's 2009 film Splice is perhaps the most horrifying. The film follows the experiences of hybrid geneticists Clive and Elsa as they reject the warnings and condemnations of their peers and superiors and decide to secretly experiment using human DNA, despite the inherent ethical problems. The resulting creature, who they call Dren, goes on to become a dangerous nightmare in the movie. While the two geneticists claim that their experiments were meant to find cures, an interrogation by Clive near the end of the film gives some insight to the true reason Dren was created.
We changed the rules.
You're not talking your way out of this.
Crossed the line, things got confused.
Confused about what?
Right and wrong.
You're in no position to talk to me about right and wrong.
And you are? Really? Why the fuck did you want to make her in the first place? Huh? For the betterment of mankind? You never wanted a normal child. Because you were afraid of losing control.
This concept of control is exactly what we see in Jurassic Park, and is exactly what Lewis warned about in The Abolition of Man. These films depict man trying to become God, what Lewis calls the magician's bargain, humans giving themselves up, piece by piece, to nature for control. Peter Kreeft explains one of the major problems of humans trying to exercise this control. He says, "We control nature, but we cannot control our own control. We control nature, but we cannot or will not control ourselves. Self-control is out exactly when nature control is in. That is exactly when self-control is most needed." If a scientist creates some sort of human being according to an arbitrary will, the scientist is fabricating control over the new being. It is from this shift of control where Lewis believes the abolition of man will come, the subjugation of nature by humans. As Malcolm points out in Jurassic Park,
God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs.
the destruction of God by man that Malcolm proposes here is a condensing of the rejection of moral absolutes about which Lewis wrote. The manner of bioengineering present in these two films requires a sacrifice of not only objective morality, but of the idea of God himself, leading to the abolition of man. The only way to understand the appropriate usage of technology is to accept nature and humanity as an objective reality, something that Hammond, Clive, and Elsa all, if unintentionally, discard. In Jurassic Park, when Hammond talks about the park he created, he joyfully exclaims that he
spared no expense. We spared no expense. And spared no expense.
While he initially speaks of money as the expense which he did not spare, a later scene shows Hammond coming to the realization that much more was lost.
Creation is an act of sheer will. When we have control again...
You never had control. That's the illusion. I was overwhelmed by the power of this place. But I made a mistake too. I didn't have enough respect for that power, and it's out now. The only thing that matters now are the people we love. Alan and Lex and Tim. John, they're out there where people are dying.
It is in that moment where Hammond realizes his mistake. He spared not only his money, but objective morality, and the consequences have become all too real to him. In a moment of bitter irony, in a new, frighteningly enlightened context, Hammond utters those three words for the final time.
Spared no expense.